Welcome to all participants of this 33rd session of the Networking Fridays, which are organized by the Air Center. And good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, wherever you are in the world, because we have participants from many different countries. And the first thing I would like to tell you is that this session is devoted to the UN Ocean Decade of Ocean Science. It is very timely because, as you know, the Ocean Decade is going to start in the 1st of January. And therefore, it's also a session on the science that we need to convert the ocean we have into the ocean we want. It's a wonderful opportunity and a unique opportunity for us to revert the state of degradation of the oceans. And since this is a global problem, we need global solutions, we need global involvement, and that's why this is a UN decade. And we are very happy to have here our Minister of Science and Technology is going to give us some words, since this is a decade of ocean science. Science is the key word, and of course is science for sustainable development. We'll also have some talks by Susanne Moser, then we have a panel of discussion. We will have also an introduction to the decade by the IOC Secretary Vladimir Ryabinin, and this will end with a short talk by Alison Clausen and also a music concert by one of our jazz musicians, which is a very famous one, and you will see a wonderful play that he has prepared on the Atlantic. So before we start, what I would like to tell you is that any questions that you want to pose to the panels, please use the Q&A box and not the chat box. It will be much easier if we can relate only to the Q&A box. If not, some of you will be using not the Zoom. Maybe you will send some questions which José Moutinho will receive, and then he will forward them to us. The other question is that the people that are using Zoom, they can use the interpretation language. So we have 3 languages which are available. You can see a globe in the bottom of your screen. And this globe you can hear either in Portuguese, in Spanish, or in French. Okay, so you can choose the language. So I should tell you that our minister, which was supposed to be the first person to speak, is now closing a session in the parliament. So we will probably have to wait a little bit until he is available to come to our session. And so we will start with the presentation by Vladimir Ryabinin. So what I would like to tell you about Dr. Vladimir Ryabinin is the Executive Secretary of the IOC, which is the Intergovernmental Oceanographic Commission of UNESCO, and is also Assistant Director General of UNESCO. He's an oceanographer, a marine engineer, a climatologist, and also an emeritus meteorologist of Russia. His research has led to a number of achievements in the medium-range weather prediction, marine meteorological services, offshore engineering, ocean and climate science. His previous affiliations include the Hydromet Center of Russia, where he was a researcher and also the head of laboratory, Moscow State University, where he was a lecturer, and the International Ocean Institute, where he was a director. In late 2001, he has joined the World Meteorological Organization, WMO, as a senior scientific officer of the organization, and he has contributed to the international coordination on climate research on polar, ocean, cryosphere, stratosphere, and atmospheric chemistry. He was appointed Executive Secretary of IOC in 2015, and in 2017, by a presidential decree, he received the distinction of the Emeritus Meteorologist of the Russian Federation. So he has contributed to the core design of international initiatives as a global ocean observing system, the Joint Technical Commission for the World Meteorological Organization, and also, of course, for IOC in terms of everything connected with oceanography, marine meteorology, the International Polar Year 2007-2008, and more recently, of course, the UN Decade of Ocean Science for Sustainable Development. So Vladimir, dear friend, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Luis. Actually, after this introduction, probably I have to retire. I've done it all. But, you know, there is no retirement, and I think there is no moment that we can relax our efforts because ocean is in the such state, according to the World Ocean Assessment, for example, published in 2016, and soon we are going to have the second edition of the World Ocean Assessment. So the World Ocean Assessment stated that the humankind is running out of time to start managing the ocean sustainably. So the decade is actually our once in a lifetime chance to revert that tendency, and this is what you alluded to, Louis, in that. So I will briefly introduce to you where we are with the decade, with certain focus on regional activities. So first of all, I just checked the website of the United Nations General Assembly. The decade implementation plan was submitted to United Nations General Assembly at the beginning of August, and it is going to be included, the decision about this, in the omnibus resolution on oceans and law of the sea that will be adopted in the plenary. But this resolution is already ready, and there is no question about the decade. I think the United Nations General Assembly was happy about the content of the plan, and they're going to take the plan into account with appreciation. The only small, I would say, issue is that there are other parts of the resolution that have some financial implications, and those implications have to be reviewed by the Financial Committee number 5 of the General Assembly, and then the Assembly will adopt the resolution, and the decade as planned will start on the 1st of January. So we are preparing for the decade, everyone. The plan basically has 3 fundamental parts. We state what we would like to see as the ocean of our dreams, the ocean that we want, the qualities of that ocean, and I think everyone now knows the content of the plan. Then we state the areas, the challenges in which we would like to see the scientific and technological development moving forward, social development as well. And then we outline the coordination of the decade. And very soon, we expect the completion of the area, of the period of the call for action that IOC issued on the 15th of October, and the 15th of January is actually the deadline for submission of your ideas for the decade programs. I see that His Excellency Manuel Heitor joined us, so I'm not filling your role. Don't worry about this, please. So I'm just introducing the subject, and then the floor goes to you. So. I think we already can say that there will be excellent submissions of different ideas for the programs. And programs are the largest elements of the structure of the decade. And after we agreed on what decade should achieve, in which areas it should achieve, now the period is for the design of scientific content of the decade. And this is where we expect the contribution from the brains of oceanography. So now let's go to the regional dimension. It is most important. Actually, oceanography is a regional science. Coastal waters, the fact that we have different masses, we have large marine ecosystems. All these features are regional. And in the course of this preparation phase, we conducted 11 workshops in all ocean basins. And actually, this makes me absolutely happy that we were able to, I think, embrace thoughts and aspirations of more than 2,000 different stakeholders, individuals, professionals, institutions, countries. For me, it was the first time in my life that we had such inclusive process and also such rich process. So now we have a report of that. The report, of course, I like the report very much. It is a very clear report because it introduces the ideas that came from these 11 workshops in 10 different basins in very succinct way. And I think it gives you food for thought for what people think about what needs to be done in the decade in their areas. So I think this is a fantastic opportunity to review the report in consolidated way and see how now you can start shaping the content of the program. So when it comes to Atlantic, there was the Western Tropical Atlantic workshop, connected oceans, you know, the Arctic Ocean, Southern Ocean. There was a workshop in the Mediterranean, also a workshop in Rio de Janeiro. So I think we already have some engagement in stakeholders, some interest in stakeholders. Atlantic is a very complicated ocean indeed, because it has that connection, immediate connection to the Arctic Ocean, with very peculiar picture of currents and water masses, with oscillations in the air, ocean atmosphere interactions that have implications for global processes, a part of the conveyor belt. So, you know, you can do really a lot, and really a lot needs to be done to put also oceanography on more practical basis, because from my previous past, I know that there are some very significant systematic errors in modeling of the Atlantic circulation. So today, I understand the program that after His Excellency speaks, there will be some presentations and a discussion of various regional groupings, regional platforms. We hope that decade will establish national decade committees. They are now emerging in many countries. I think we will convene a meeting of those committees to give you, you know, uniform support in your thinking. So if there is no grouping, or you feel alone, or you don't know how to start, then please contact the decade group, your IOC focal point. So these groups will be established, and we will start moving forward. And I would like also to state that I believe that the several months to come, next year, after we receive on the 15th of January all ideas about the decade, probably will not receive all, but you know, this will be, I hope, one of the most intensive periods of scientific design in the history of oceanography. And this period in the co-design mode will result in ideas for programs that will be extremely demanding and extremely ambitious. As oceanographers and people who work with the ocean, you remember the World Ocean Circulation Experiment, Tropical Ocean Global Atmosphere Study, GGOVS, Census of Marine Life. So this is the scale that we would like now to multiply. There will be more circulation experiments. And I think what is important, that we need to move this science towards solving the issues of sustainable development. For that, science has to produce data. Data needs to be used in very useful way by the users. There must be pool for data. There must be feedback for those for those who generate the data. And that is exactly the paradigm that we would like to create in co-design mode, creating enabling environment for oceanography to flourish as a science and serve the community, that serve the society as a contribution to sustainable development in terms of not only Agenda 2030, but disaster risk reduction. You know what is happening now in the Pacific with the tropical cyclone. So our world is really requiring ocean science that is helping all facets of sustainable development. So please look once again at the regional report, contribute to that report. And I would like also to thank the Air Center, thank our founding partner of IOC, Luis, who is tirelessly working to help all of us move together in a co-design mode. So I think in this friendship, in the partnership, we are going to generate new science with very strong regional component, and that will be taking us forward towards saving the ocean. So this is what I wanted to say. Thank you for this contribution, and I hope that this meeting will be as interesting as all your Fridays. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Vladimir, for this wonderful presentation and good synthesis of what is happening concerning the decade and the launching of the regional synthesis report. So now we have already our, His Excellency, our Minister of Science and Education, and it's my honor to introduce him. So Professor Manuel Heitor is our Minister of Science, Technology and Higher Education of the Portuguese government since 2015. He was also former Secretary of State of Science, Technology and Higher Education, and he's a full professor at Instituto Superior Técnico in Lisbon. So he has a PhD in Imperial College from London in mechanical engineering, a postdoctoral position at the University of California, San Diego, and then he has pursued his academic career at IST in Lisbon, focusing his research in the area of energy and the environment, with emphasis on fluid mechanicals and experimental combustion. So he has served as deputy president of the Instituto Superior Técnico, and he has dedicated himself for many years to the study of science, technology, and innovation policies, including higher education policies and management. He has coordinated several PhD programs at IST on engineering and public policies and design engineering, and also advanced manufacturing systems. He was also a research fellow at the University of Texas in Austin, at the IC2 Institute for Innovation, Creativity and Capital, and he was a visiting professor at Harvard. So he's the key person behind the Air Center. And as we know, we are talking about the UN Decade of Ocean Science for Sustainable Development. So it's highly appropriate, and we deeply thank our Minister of Science so that he can give us some words on this. So Mr. Minister, it's my pleasure to give you the floor.
Thank you very much, Luis, and good morning to everyone around this Network Friday. Let me thank again the Air Center for keeping us very much active every Fridays worldwide, discussing issues certainly associated with Atlantic interactions, but most of the topics are also beyond the regional context of the Atlantic, because we have only one single and common ocean, and that should be our main target of attention. And this is particularly timely because 3 days ago, on December 15, this week, the United Nations, through the UNDP, United Nations Development Programme, published the UN Development Report, or the Human Development Report 2020, which is the very first Human Development Report after the COVID-19 pandemics, and probably one of the most important human development reports in the last years, because it calls our attention for the new geological era we are entering in, the so-called Anthropocene, particularly in the context of unbalance between economic and human activity in Mother Nature. And it is important also to note in this context that the Human Development Report 2020 defines one of probably the most important criterion for defining these new times we live in the Anthropocene, in association with the deposition of plastics in the depth of the ocean. And therefore, the idea that we need to find a new balance in the coming decade is particularly true when we look at the interaction between oceans and climate, and an important proxy is definitely the concentration of plastics in the oceans, and therefore the full process of transformation into microplastics. And this topic is particularly important in the Air Center context, but also worldwide. Either the United Nations or the OECD, the Commission, the World Bank, over the last few years has considerably and systematically discussed that this question of particularly the ocean health, which has been the topic of the decade for the ocean science for sustainable development, is particularly associated with 3 key issues. The very first is the need for new knowledge. We don't know enough about ocean health, and therefore we need to do more research and better research and open research, engaging everyone, every single region in the definition of new knowledge oriented towards ocean health, and bringing together different stakeholders, which will require certainly further investment from public and private sources to develop new knowledge. The second issue is institutional innovation. We have lived over the last decades very much in a continuous verticalization of our institutional framework, and we know that the new knowledge do require a transdisciplinary and a logistic approach, which will certainly require processes of institutional innovation, particularly through collaborative arrangements. Actually, the Air Center is itself a collaborative arrangement between North-South, South-North Atlantic regions, and therefore institutional innovation together with the new knowledge agendas are particularly critical. The third issue, which has become also very clear in the last OECD report on the sustainability of the blue economy, is associated with new observation methods. Particularly, we know that the complexity of these processes do require more than ever a clear integration of ways to observe planet Earth from space, particularly making use of satellite image and small or image obtained from sensors in smaller and smaller satellites in low altitude orbits, and therefore the integration of space systems, in particular Earth observation systems with in situ sensors in the ocean and in coastal areas will be more critical than ever in the coming decade. And therefore, these three topics, new knowledge, institutional innovation, and new observation methods, actually have framed the development of the Air Center to promote the engagement of regional stakeholders in the South and North Atlantic for North-North, South-South, South-North, North-South cooperation, and particularly with ultimate goal to make the Atlantic as a living lab for new experimentation, certainly in association with the creation of jobs and the way we look at sustainable development also as a clear process for new job creation in association with new knowledge and in an innovative institutional context. It is under this context that I should definitely acknowledge and thank to Vladimir, the Executive Secretary of IOC, for participating so actively in this forum, but also to Cesar Toro, the head of the UNESCO EIC Office for IOC Caribbean at the UNESCO, and also to our Brazilian colleagues, particularly Karen Silverwood-Cope from the Brazilian Ministry of Science, Technology and Innovation, and a number of other speakers, including Alison Clausen, which will help to organize this session, certainly Susanne Moser and Taylor Goelz, among many others, and certainly last but not least, to Luís Pinheiro, the chairman of the Portuguese Committee for IOC. I should also note that, as far as I understand, Mário Laginha, one of the leading Portuguese and European pianists, is also with us, and he has also played and will play further in the context of the decade of ocean science for sustainable development. And this is important because we certainly need artists and leading artists to engage with scientists and entrepreneurs to promote our creativity, and certainly through music, particularly in a year where we commemorate the 250th anniversary of Beethoven, we can certainly better understand how music is so important in better understanding the challenges for sustainable development. And one particularly importance is that although the Air Center has been created through European countries, essentially Portugal and Spain, more and more the United Kingdom and Norway, it has been associated since the very early moment with sub-Saharan African countries, South Africa, Nigeria, and also certainly Brazil, through several Brazilian states, and always with a clear open mind from the European Commission, and a special word to Sigi Gruber from the DG RTD in Brussels, that has more and more embraced this overall goal of promoting ocean research towards the sustainable development in close articulation with their center, certainly in an inclusive way, and bringing together and federating many other European institutions. We have a tremendous challenge over the coming decade, and this decade of the ocean, we should aim that to achieve and to arrive in 2030 with a much better situation that we are in 2020. So it will be 10 years of building trust with future generations, but certainly, again, bringing back this very recent UNDP report about the Anthropocene, better understanding that we are really entering in a new geological era, where the role of the interactions between oceans and climates will be critical and more critical than ever to better understand where future generations can trust on our way to do economic development. And this is important again, because this is very much to understand the reasons of the pandemic crisis we live in. We need to clearly call the attention of everyone that the pandemic started in animals, it passed to human beings, and that zoonotic diseases are a result of this imbalance, which again is also happens in many manifestations of climate change, where again the position of plastics in the oceans is a clear result of that imbalance. And therefore, again, the decade of ocean science is very much a decade to entering in the new phase of the Anthropocene, which requires, again, new knowledge, institutional innovation, and new observation methods. And that is the reason why the Earth Center was created, to promote South-North, North-South cooperation in the Atlantic. Thank you very much for your participation. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Minister, for your overarching overview of the framework in which the UN decade is happening. And also, I would like to remember everyone that the Earth Center has done a lot of work concerning particularly integrating ocean observation at sea, undersea, and also from space. It's critical that we integrate the three types of observation so that we have a clear idea of what is happening, and we need to have a sustainable observation system which is global, which allows us to make predictions and to be able to forecast the coming changes that we will see in the ocean, and also to be able to make all adaptations to the society so that they are less affected by all the kind of effects that we can get from the ocean, in particular extreme events, which are becoming more and more common. So next we will have a short video on the Ocean Decade preparatory phase, which will be shown very shortly. Yes, thank you, Alison.
The next 10 years will be crucial for life on the planet as we know it. Climate change. The next 10 years will be crucial for life on the planet as we know it. Climate change. Food shortages. Epidemics and disasters. Economic crises and unemployment. The good news? We can rely on a powerful source of common solutions to overcome these challenges. Our one shared ocean. Set to become the world's 7th largest economy by 2030, our ocean regulates climate and provides food and livelihoods for over 3 billion people. But do we know all our ocean has to offer? Can we harness ocean solutions to achieve our global goals by 2030? The United Nations Decade of Ocean Science for Sustainable Development brings together scientists, governments, business, philanthropists and NGOs to unlock the science we need for the future we want. Are you ready to join the movement? Find out more www.oceandecade.org.
Okay, so now to everyone, we will have a presentation by Susanne Moser, which will give us an overview of the outcomes and next steps on the global regional co-design sessions for the decade. So Susanne is a consultant for the IOC and to the Global Ocean webinar series, and she also serves as a senior advisor to the International Science Council's Transformations for Sustainability program, a partner of the Ocean Decade. She's a geographer by training, and she works in the US and internationally on adaptation to climate change, science policy interactions, climate change communication, and social resilience in the face of traumatic and transformative challenges associated with climate change. She has served on scientific advisory boards for Future Earth, the US National Research Council, and she has contributed to IPCC and US national and regional climate assessments. So Susie, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Luis. Very pleased to be here and to hear the minister and Vladimir introduce the what we're doing today. What I would like to do is to bring attention for a few moments to the science piece and pick up on what Vladimir called this different paradigm with which we want to do ocean science in this coming decade. So if you go to the next slide, as part of the planning process for this decade, the Intergovernmental Ocean Commission held a webinar series that included both global and regional webinars. The regional emphasis was already pointed out earlier. And this webinar series was really in this spirit of this new paradigm of trying to reach out to the stakeholders, the scientists in different world regions, be as inclusive as possible, and think about what is the science that we need for the ocean decade, co-designing that research agenda, and then co-delivering it to the decision makers that are in charge of essentially the sustainability decisions in the years to come. The idea behind that is, can we begin to form partnerships? Can we get down to the local level where these decisions get made and find out what is it that we need? The focus of these webinars, the mostly virtual sessions, since we all were affected by COVID, basically was to focus on how do we do this kind of work? What data do we need, and how do we share them across the regions in which we work, and then get into the substance of it, the nexus of ocean and human health, the nexus of ocean and climate, the sustainable economies, and really go a little bit beyond sort of the tourism and fisheries aspects that are sort of central to the oceans. But there's a lot of other types of sectors involved, and particularly in small island development states, but really in all the regions around the world. What observations do we need? How do we ensure food security from the oceans? So those were the topics. And what I want to do in this short presentation is to give you a sense of what we talked about and what came of that, what recommendations emerged, so that we build a co-design kind of science agenda for the next 10 years. If you go to the next slide. And it really comes out of this recognition, as you heard the opening words of Vladimir had a lot to do with, our ocean is not in a good state of health at the moment. How do we get to ocean sustainability? Just tinkering on the edges is not going to be enough. We need transformative science. We need transformative action. And that means that the science needs to change itself, not just in the focus, but how we do it and how we connect that science to decision makers. There are obviously clear knowledge gaps. There are observation gaps. And how do we get to something that really makes a difference? So that was really what motivated holding this session, and to, quite frankly, catch up in the ocean sciences arena with a way of working that has become quite common now in sustainability science. So if you go to the next slide, I'll give you a brief overview of the sessions. As I mentioned, there were 2 global sessions. I happened to moderate those 2 sessions. One just laid out the importance of doing transdisciplinary research, TDR, as you see on the slide, and to begin to understand that. And then, you know, a lot of these regional sessions followed. I wasn't part of those, but what emerged out of that in a nutshell was, well, how do we actually do this kind of work? How do we do transdisciplinary science? How do we build the capacity? How do we fund this kind of research? And so, you know, out of, I'll speak more in a moment about what specifically came out of the regional sessions, but we then came back in a second global session to speak more specifically about these methodologies and ways of engaging, how the role of the researcher changes, what the institutional context needs to be to support this kind of research. It's still not common, even though it is spreading, but it is not something that, you know, in siloed disciplinary ways of working that we are accustomed to. Most of us are not trained in that. So how do we get there? That was essentially, you know, what happened in this virtual series. And as you can see, between the regional and the global sessions, we had on the order of 2,000 people attending. Again, echoing what Vladimir said, how inclusive this process has already been. And really the intention is to make that be as inclusive going forward as we implement the actions that come out of it. So if you go to the next slide, I want to you know, give you a brief overview of these global webinars that we had. The first one, as I said, really laying the foundation. What do we mean by co-designed solution-oriented research? Really emphasis here is on the solutions-oriented research. You know, yes, we do need observations. We do need to understand basic processes of the oceans, fundamental science, quite frankly, especially in all the complex ways in which it is connected to other Earth systems. And yet we need to put that in service too, if you will, the real urgent actions that are needed, the changing ways in which we manage the ocean. So what does that mean? How do we do that? How do we foster that co-design, co-produce, and co-deliver type of research? So we just basically laid the foundation. It was, you know, quite general, if you will. And when we came back after all the regional sessions, we dove into some of the issues that rose again and again in all the regional sessions. Exactly, how do you engage? How, you know, what is the role of the researcher? What are we, you know, learning of how to integrate different knowledge systems, people in the academic realm and local knowledge, indigenous knowledge? How do you bring that together and co-generate or co-create new knowledge? And also, again, this big topic of how do we fund it? And how do we build the skills, the capacity to do this kind of work? So that was sort of the framing of it. And if you go to the next slide, you'll see, and by the way, those sessions are recorded and you can find them on the Ocean Decade website. So briefly, what do we mean by this collaborative research, transdisciplinary research? You know, what are the key elements of that? I think important here is that, yes, we talk or we collaborate across disciplines, but also across sectors. So academic and government and private sector, civic sectors, and across geographies. The ocean is the most connected Earth system, if you will. There's just no way we can solve the global sustainability issues around the ocean if we just focus very narrowly. It needs to be anchored locally, but obviously it needs to go beyond. So that's the sort of, you know, overarching definition that the Ocean Decade uses. And it has these 3 elements that I've now used several times: co-designing, co-production, and co-delivery. And what's meant by that, I think, quite frankly, the co-design phase is maybe the most important, although the other ones are you know, essential to deliver that science to the users. But the co-design phase is where we shape the research questions, the research agenda together. It's not just academics, sitting in their offices and thinking, oh, this would be really interesting, this is a gap. But what does that question actually, how does that translate in a practical context? Maybe that question is slightly different when someone has to make a decision. What do they need to know? When do they need to know it? And what kind of data do they need? So that's a really important element and probably the most time-consuming one in actually engaging with stakeholders, and not just one-time consulting, but on an ongoing basis. This is where you build relationships with the stakeholders. And then oftentimes, it's not just scientists going off and doing the research and then bringing it back later. It's actually co-creating the knowledge and involving stakeholders in various ways in the research process, to make sure that, at all stages of the process, we keep their needs and their information needs in mind. Oftentimes the stakeholders hold very important knowledge about the topics we want to study. And so it's really combining the best of knowledge from all sides. And then once we have that new knowledge, what do we do with it? How is that knowledge used? Can we make sure that it is appropriately used? If we produce tools or data sets, you can't just put it on a loading dock and assume that people know what to do with that. So it's really helping people to use it right, to share it, to bring it to the right stakeholders, to build platforms that are accessible and user-friendly. So that is really, it's the entire process, and it's cyclical and it's ongoing, not just a one-time thing what we're talking about. Go ahead to the next slide. And, doing that well is really a challenging issue. What came up again and again is that, it often begins with stakeholders, when they come into such a process, have very different values and expectations, and how to reconcile those and integrate those into a workable research agenda. That's quite challenging. Oftentimes, in ocean regions, ocean basins, multiple stakeholders are living in different language regions, right? So bringing them together around a shared language and not disadvantaging some because they might not be fluent in one of the major dominant languages, that's a challenge. But it's also disciplinary languages, right? Sometimes we speak in a jargon that is just so inaccessible to others. Whether or not stakeholders value this kind of engagement, yeah, not always. People vary in that. And so how do you make sure that this is actually something that they see a value in and want to spend time on? There, of course, is the issue, which we'll come back to again, the unequal resources. People's day job is not research necessarily. How do we enable them to participate effectively in these processes? And then simply to get their time, get their attention, get their commitment to stay involved in what could be a lengthy process. And all of this last year, and who knows for how long, has been shaped by a pandemic that makes engagement in person incredibly difficult or risky. And so then that brings up, are we connected to the internet stable enough to have these conversations? It's easier when relationships are already built to just pick up Zoom or phone or whatever and connect. When you are not yet related or not yet in a well-established connection, then it's much, much more difficult to begin those relationships in a physically distant way, as we have been all charged to do over this past year. So these are the core challenges, and I just simply put COVID in there because it's really making engagement quite different and challenging. If you go to the next slide, I'll briefly give you the overarching recommendations that came out of these regional sessions. First of all, we need to very clearly define what is the actual role of stakeholders and their expected time investment, money investment, whatever it is, in these processes. It takes time to build mutual understanding and coordinate the inputs from everyone. It's a lot easier, as I said, when you already have these pre-existing relationships and some shared practical experience. If that's not the case, then I would say start your relationship building now. The ocean decade is coming. It takes time to make that happen. Sometimes it helps to have a structural mechanism to actually, support this kind of interaction and to manage the complex interactions of stakeholders, to define a common goal and what is it that we want to achieve, to constantly and clearly and repeatedly communicate what that is, to stay in contact, and to establish some co-leadership. So it's not just in the hands of academics, but with non-academics partners, really important. And because of the inequalities that exist, just to, from the get-go, understand what are they and how can we address them as part of the collaboration that we do. So that's the overall picture. If you go to the next slide, I'm just gonna go through that very quickly. Out of each of the regions came very different specific needs and specific recommendations of what is needed. Here you see 4 examples from the Arctic, the Southern Ocean, Africa, and the Western Tropical Atlantic. That ranges from how do we involve indigenous and local communities more effectively? How do we build that sustained funding? What is a user-friendly knowledge platform on a continent as large as Africa, that works with different languages, different capacities, or how do we bring women more effectively into the process, given how much of change agents they are on the ground? So again, thinking already about the delivery from the beginning, right? So if you go to the next slide, I'll give you a couple more examples from the other workshops in the Southeast Pacific, the Western Pacific, and the Mediterranean. Again, some similar and some different issues that came up. You can read them all here. Sometimes it had to do with how do we build the research capacity or promote research centers? How do we bring in the arts in more effectively engaging stakeholders in imagining a sustainable ocean? So again, there are regional uniquenesses and differences and capacities and also different challenges, but there are also common themes. Often the inequalities and capacity issues were just huge. So if you go to the next slide, we will synthesize that, what we learned about co-designing a research agenda for the oceans in a synthesis report that will be delivered in January 2021, and then a training course that will be built on that, will be delivered early in the decade so that we really enable people to do this kind of work. If you go to the next slide. And I just want to invite you all to get involved. Some of you on this call may have connections to your funders in your countries, wherever you are. You might be in the position to propose ways to implement some of the opportunities, the research programs, the research questions, answer them. There is a call for decade actions out there right now, and you can begin to submit your proposals right now. This is a call for really large programmatic efforts involving lots of different partners in each of these efforts. So if you have an idea for that, please go to the website and submit that. And really everyone can get involved at the national and regional levels. And with that, I just want to thank you all. If you click one more time and hand it back to Luis for maybe moderating some Q&A.
Yes. Thank you so much, Susie, for giving us this very nice overview of the outcomes of the regional sessions that we had and how inclusive was the process in co-designing the decade. Really, if we want to make a transformative change in the way we look at the ocean, particularly having an overarching view and a holistic view of the processes, it's critical that we have everyone involved. And so we now have time for a few questions. What I would like to ask people is that we have already some questions in the Q&A box. Please make sure that the questions that you put there now are for Susan. And also, please try to be as synthetic as possible and formulating a clear question and not just a comment, because it's the way that we can use most effectively the short time that we have. So we have here a first question from Krista con Hildebrand Andrade, and she says that Susan has emphasized the importance of co-designing and how complex this is and time incentives. So she says that it is challenging given the multiple activities that the key holders may already have and the expertise that it is required. So what she's asking is, how can one access funding to support the co-designing phase?
That's a really good question. In so many instances, that part of the work is not supported, right? There are programs that do, and I guess we had representation from Future Earth and from the Belmont Forum, which of course, the Belmont Forum being sort of the funding arm, if you will, for international transformative science for, you know, all kinds of global change issues, including the oceans. And one of the reason why I emphasize the Belmont Forum is it has made co-design a core principle of the research that it wants to fund. So there are some funders that have a very distinct emphasis on this, whereas some of the more traditional funders do not. So, you know, this is something that you have to explore from the get-go. It is transdisciplinary science, engaged science, collaborative science, co-design, is that mentioned in their calls for proposal? I think increasingly scientists or funders, science funders understand that science is more impactful, has greater societal value if society is actually included. So I think this is, some of the work is actually with the funders to convince them that this is important work and to point them to actually scholarship that shows that co-designed research is more impactful. So depending on where you are in the world, I would say, you know, look at foundations, look at national science funders, and look at international programs like the Belmont Forum to see if you can begin to identify some funders who are more interested. I think development-oriented funders tend to have, you know, they're a little bit ahead in this regard as well. The traditional science funders might be a little slower in the uptake.
Thank you so much, Susan. We have another question, which is it possible to join the IOC working groups? We are particularly interested in the Atlantic Caribbean, and is it open to all? How can we sign up and become part of the group?
So for that question, in terms of the machinations of how to get involved, Alison, can I call on you, or I don't know, Vladimir? Yeah, so maybe Alison, you want to take this one on and help people out exactly on how to get involved.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Susie, and thanks for the question. So these national decade committees and the regional platforms are emerging through different regions and countries in the world. I will put a link into the chat box now, so you can all see the latest list of committees and platforms as well as the focal points. And the best thing to do is to contact them directly, because each group has a different way of getting new members involved. And if you see that there is not yet a committee in your country or your region, then feel free to start talking to other partners about establishing one. We would love to see a really wide network of these national and regional committees and platforms developing over the life of the decade. So have a look at that page, keep checking back because it will be updated regularly, and get in touch with the focal points that are there.
Thanks, Alison.
Okay, thank you so much. We have another question. How are the regional meetings and inputs linked to the overall implementation plan and the global aims, objectives of the decade?
I guess I can start with that, and Alison, you can maybe chime in as well. But you know, the first step was in really engaging each of the regions that I just presented to you, to hear from them. What are the key science issues? How do we do co-design, and what do people need to actually deliver that kind of science, right? So that was the first step over the course of the decade in the implementation of those, that I think will depend a lot on what decade actions are proposed for each of the regions, and you know, how people can get involved. But Alison, you might have additional suggestions there.
Yeah, I think it's important to remember that the implementation plan is really a framework, right? It provides a structure, it provides a vision, it provides the priorities, but the actual actions, as Susie mentioned and as Vladimir mentioned as well, the actions are going to be developed by communities around the world over the course of the decade. So these regional webinars that were just held are really a way of getting people together to start developing those decade actions. They're really the start of a process, and there will be training coming up, there'll be the report coming up, where we're certainly going to continue providing support to this co-design process, but they're the start of a process to enable stakeholders to work together to respond to the calls for decade actions. Now, there is a first call out there currently. This is really just a first call. There will be other calls, at least 2 more calls coming out next year, and then in the future years of the decade. So it's a way of starting to get people together to identify the actions so they can respond to the calls for decade actions as they come up.
Okay, thank you. We have another point, which is in the Southern Hemisphere is now major holidays, and so getting people together to co-design Ocean Decade projects is a bit tricky. And so they are asking whether this has been taken into account when considering this deadline for the 15th of January. Maybe, I don't know whether Vladimir or Alison want to comment on this. Vladimir, yes.
Well, you know, I think New Year is coming to the whole planet. Yeah. So, you know, I congratulate everyone on its approach, and then we need actually another year, not this one. But I would like to say that, you know, of course, the call has been in place since 15th of October. You know, I just would vote for extended congratulations and technical celebrations and continuing work on the ideas. But, you know, and then what is important, that this is not the only call. And I think you will be able also to take part in the brainstorming on the programs. That is important. So, you know, I think we are opting for something like a dozen, maybe more, but, you know, a limited number of big activities. And we all would like to have you participating in all these activities. So I think there will be some follow-up that will enable further shaping of the proposals for the programs.
Thank you. We have here a comment, which is not a question, but I think it's important. That's why I'm going to read it. So what they are giving is the example of co-designing that we can learn from the Census of Marine Life. So they think this was a good example of co-design, collaboration, and so on between public-private partnerships. And so similar efforts are probably needed at this time so that we can face the many challenges that we have for the decade. And so translating these challenges into opportunity are critical, and they are referring that the Census of Marine Life was co-funded together in more than $550 million from non-Sloan sources around the world, including national governments, international organizations, and maritime industries. Also, the Sloan Foundation committed about 78 million in support of the Census of Marine Life. So I do think this is an important experience and outcome. And maybe would you like to comment on this, Vladimir? I know that the IOC is already contacting all kind of philanthropist organizations, all governments, and all kind of institutions that can help to fund the decade. But maybe you can elaborate a bit on this.
No, I think I can. Thank you very much, Luis. Can start elaborating on this. And I think it's very important to realize that the decade was proclaimed by United Nations verbatim within structures and within resources. It means that there is not a single penny that will be coming to United Nations decade from kind of United Nations as an organization. But of course, what we are starting hopefully will result in billions of dollars invested in ocean science. So the current process is that we are assembling ideas. We hope that through communication, through making these ideas understood as extremely useful ideas for the sustainable ocean economy, and this is where there are very significant developments. There will be these ideas will be picked up by funding agencies, by the private sector, by philanthropic organizations, by the governments, and we will have a semi-coordinated, soft, but still focused design on the way forward. And indeed, it may result, and hopefully will result in the same paradigm that manifested in the census of marine life, when there was an initial, very significant contribution from the Sloan Foundation, but in the end, it resulted in a community-based global activity. So that's exactly the paradigm that I would see. But you know, if Alison, you would like to add something to that thought, that would be most appreciated. Or maybe Sue.
Thanks, Vladimir. Perhaps just to add to that, you know, it's very clear that as we're asking, or as programs and projects are coming in for endorsement, they don't need to have all their funding identified, because one of the key aims of the decade is to really be able to look at the programs and projects that have been submitted, identify where there are funding gaps, and then talk with this community of funders that is developing around the decade to try and play a matchmaking role. And we're putting various mechanisms in place. So while there's no big pot of funding associated with a decade, certainly the aim is to work with funders so they're aligning their resource allocation strategies with the priorities of the decade. And that is going to be through the analysis of the programs and the projects that are coming through these calls for decade actions. So it's very important, if you've got a program that you don't have fully financed, don't let that stop you submitting it, because it's part of the aim of the decade as well, is to try and find and match together funders and those groups that require funding for their actions.
Could I speak to it as well?
Yeah.
I guess, you know, Alison, what you just said made me remember something from the Transformations to Sustainability program that I'm part of within the International Science Council. So when we had our first call for transformative knowledge network research programs, really, we had a really interesting experience. That first call we did with a seed funding approach, where I think something like close to 40 projects got a very small amount of funding for 6 months to essentially be supported in that co-design, in that first part of jointly developed projects. And what we learned in that is that so much knowledge generation was accomplished in that first phase. Many research projects that I have seen over the course of my own career, you know, they have to do that work as part of whatever, if they're funded for 2 years, 3 years or something like that. They spend the first year basically just getting to know each other. And by having a focused small pot of funding for the co-design, so much got accomplished in trust building, in relationship building, in actual knowledge generation. It was phenomenal. So I just want to sort of send it back as a message to the funder pool that you're developing, that that's actually really effective and efficient investment in that first piece. And they all then launch into their projects far more effectively. So just, you know, take that idea back to them, and a little money there goes a long way. Anyway, back to you.
Thank you so much, Susan. We have one final question. We are a bit short of time. Anyway, the questions that you put in the Q&A, I hope Susan can answer some of them directly, or Vladimir or Alison. And one final question that we have here is asking whether fishermen and fish farmers were involved in the process of co-designing the decade, the implementation plan. And this is important because we should consider their indigenous knowledge and their experience concerning ocean issues. And so this is the key question. Have they been involved? How they have been involved? Can you give us some ideas, Susie?
They certainly were involved, but Alison, you were involved more with the regional action, so you have more specific numbers maybe that you can offer here.
Yeah, thanks, Susie. Yeah, they were definitely involved, and through in fact, the regional synthesis report, which was the report that Vladimir mentioned in his intervention, which we'll put the link back in the chat box, summarizes the results of these 11 regional workshops. And while I'm here, I'd like to give a big shout out to our colleague Julie Rigaud, who is listening into this, who was really the mastermind behind those regional workshops, as well as the series that Susie has just been talking about. But these regional workshops that were held between June 2019 and April this year across 10 ocean basins involved different representatives from fishing communities, as well as from artisanal fishers, from small-scale fishers, from industrial fishers. So the fishing community was very much involved throughout those regional consultations. And the result was that both in the outcomes and the Ocean Decade challenges, which are really key parts of the implementation plan, issues around fisheries, around aquaculture, around the role of the ocean in providing food security, you know, both for developed nations as well as local communities in small island developing states or at least developed countries, is very much front and center in the decade. And again, the idea now is that those communities continue to be engaged through the processes that Susie has been talking about, so that now the actual actions that are developed to fit within that framework that's in the implementation plan can also incorporate and collaborate with these groups.
Thank you so much, Alison. I just noticed we have here two other questions that maybe we can quickly, I will ask for very quick answers. One of them is considering the funding issue, and because funding is of course crucial to implement the decade activities, is the decade thinking of holding specific meetings with funders to streamline funding mechanisms?
The short answer is yes.
Yes. And the next question is, Catherine Downey is asking that they have a large project that they wish to submit as a decade action, but after reading the guidelines, they think it falls between a program and a project. So how should they go about deciding, getting advice on where it fits? And if they submit it, if they cannot submit it for the 15th of January deadline, can they resubmit it later?
Yeah, so lots there. Really good question, and we're getting this question a lot. There is no very clear black and white answer. Is it a program or is it a project? But what you can do is you can go to the link on the call for actions page. You go to the first question, and you can you can register your idea, which feeds it into a database, and then we can give you some advice whether it fits as a program or a project. I will put this in the chat box to give you more guidance on exactly how to do that. But just to finish off, if you submit it and it doesn't fit as a program, yes, certainly it means that you can resubmit it later as a project. It means you can take it away, continue to work on it, resubmit it as a program. It's not, if it doesn't get endorsed this time around, it's not the end of the road for your idea. It just means that it probably needs some adaptation and modification and evolution. But let me put some more details in the chat box.
Thank you so much. So please, if you want to continue sending some questions, please put them in for Susie in particular. Please put them in the Q&A, and Susie will try to answer on here because we have to continue. So now we will have a panel discussion, which will be translating the Ocean Decade to regional and national action. This is a key issue because what we really want is actions that are transformative. And therefore we have here three invited people. So we have Cesar Toro, who is co-chair of the Western Tropical Atlantic Task Force, Karen Silverwood-Cope from the Brazil National Committee, and Taylor Goelz, who is a research associate from NOAA. So Cesar Toro is the head of the Subcommission for the Caribbean and Adjacent Regions, IOCARIB, of the IOC, which is based in Cartagena, Colombia. Between 2009 and 2015, he was also responsible for the UNESCO Natural Science Program for the Caribbean. He has promoted the development of marine and ocean science and technology in the states of the region through strengthening international institutional capacity, coordination of the intergovernmental groups and networks of scientists and experts. He coordinates the IOC of UNESCO programs for the Latin American Caribbean region, and he is working actively with national, regional, and international entities. He's a physical oceanographer with a PhD from Quebec in physical oceanography, and is a specialist in dynamical oceanography and climate change adaptation and mitigation. So we have then Karen. Karen is the general coordinator for the ocean, Antarctic, and geosciences at the Ministry of Science, Technology, and Innovation of Brazil, which this is the organization which is leading the National Steering Committee for the implementation of the Ocean Decade. And then Taylor Goelz is a marine scientist and a policy analyst. She's currently serving as a John A. Cowes Marine Policy Fellow at NOAA, and she's leading the preparation, collaboration, and outreach in the United States for the Ocean Decade of Ocean Science for Sustainable Development. Her background and expertise spans the realm of marine resources management, from participatory decision-making processes for oyster management to finance mechanisms for coastal resilience. She's passionate about finding unique approaches and solutions to common problems and creating novel partnerships. So we have a panel of 3 specialists which have a very complementing views on what is happening concerning the decade and how we can translate the implementation plan into regional and national actions. So I would start by asking a question to Cesar. How can the regional decade initiatives successfully work across borders to unite the decade stakeholders?
Thank you very much, Luis, for having us here during this very important panel discussion. I will follow, I will work and build upon what was already very pointedly described in the previous presentation of my colleagues. I will ask, please, next slide. Next slide, please. Yes, as you can see, this is a shot from our IOC Global Ocean Science Research, and what we can see, there is an uneven science capacity. It's very clear that the capacity in the different regions is different and is asymmetrically distributed. And if we just focus on the Atlantic, for instance, on the wider Atlantic region, so we always, that will be more impressive, that uneven asymmetric capacity on science. Next. And this is also a reference from our IOC Global Science Ocean Science Report that was just launched this Monday. So what is important to retain in this case is that if you look at the papers published between 2012 and 2017, 61% of those papers were published by ocean scientists globally that had at least one co-author from a foreign country. Yeah, so this is a trend that for producing a competitive ocean science that is driven by international partnership. And here the key issue is being able in advancing science nowadays is only through those international partnerships among experts. Next. So when we are discussing the ocean decade challenges, you can see how many challenges we are facing and how one can solve this and reach and support these challenges, produce answers that we can address those challenges. It's a multiple, and as well, it's a very complex coalition of different stakeholders, etc. Next, please. If you look at what was already mentioned, is how we are, how it is the process for the ocean decade has been built. Is one of the main key components of this process is to have those regional discussions. Those regional discussion fora are extremely key, because when we see the global aspect of science and the capacity in science, as we mentioned just a few seconds ago, is extremely asymmetrically distributed and is uneven. So we need to, in order to understand what are the key actors, key stakeholders, etc., it is important to focus at the regional level. Why at the regional level? Because this is the key component where we can reach the different networks and the different stakeholders who has a very has an interest, a common interest in addressing their challenges in the region. So by doing this, we are engaging people and engaging the different stakeholders with a everyday program and problem and challenge. And this is extremely important, as was pointed out by Susie when we describe how to engage the different stakeholders, because they have the different expectations. So we can address this at the national level. Will give us the actions that will transform at the national level. But however, if we like to transform the process, that it could be accomplished at the regional level. So in our case, the Western Tropical Atlantic, we have a workshop, and the experts in the region and the different stakeholders, they come up with a series of issues, grand challenges, and grand actions that might provide answers to those challenges. And we are in the process of developing regional initiatives. And if you look at the main components of the economy in the region, you will have maritime transportation, fisheries, tourism, and other fisheries, of course. So if we are really willing to make use of those transformation, it will be necessary to take into account all the representative of all those sectors and their interests and their expectation. As well, in this case, it's extremely important also to keep in mind what are the communities who are going to be to address one of the challenges, the transformation in our behavior. So the traditional knowledge is also coming up as one of the elements, and the consideration of other science besides ocean science, in particular the social science, who are going to be an element of transformation in our behavior and the way how we are going to achieve a sustainable development via the ocean science. So next. So what is available in the region, and when it was mentioned the need for having a structural mechanism to manage the complexity in our region. So one of the major elements that and the components that and mechanisms that the region has from ocean science is the Intergovernmental Oceanographic Commission, Subcommission for the Caribbean and adjacent regions and the Caribbean, who has the overall responsibility for formulation of policy, principle, and strategy, and for the planning and coordination of the UN Decade of Ocean Science for Sustainable Development in the Western Tropical Atlantic region. So we are in the process in order to being able to go beyond a national jurisdiction and to and also to be able to join all those expectations and interests of the different stakeholders. The Western Tropical Atlantic Group has been established a regional planning group that will also catalyze actions, projects, and programs. So here is the key is being able to use this structural mechanism as IOC, who has the leading role in the planning and coordination for achieving a truly co-design of those initiatives that we have at the national, in the region. And the interests of the different stakeholders are really and clearly recognized, and they have the contribution and participation. So the challenges that we are facing, no one country can address by itself. That this is what we know. Secondly, the challenges no one ocean science in a specific silo can address. We need to have an integrated view and to achieve that transformation. And that is the way to implement those initiatives that are emerging from the process is by having a clear mechanism to planning and catalyze all those actions. So with that, I would like just to summarize in a nutshell. This is my answer, Luis, and thank you.
Thank you so much, Cesar. Could I ask Karen, why is national action so important to achieve the vision of the decade? And what can we learn from the Brazilian experience?
Hi, good morning, good afternoon. Thank you, everyone. Good to be here with you and to share the Brazilian experience and how we did take the decentralized coordination mechanisms provided by IOC to do national work and reach out for local stakeholders in Brazil. I'm going to present briefly to you the results we achieved in Brazil from our preparatory phase to the IOC Ocean Decade. But I will also, at the very end of my talk, present 4 suggestions for the way forward as we're moving from the preparatory phase to the implementation phase. We're going to need to go deeper and further in our understanding in common formula metrics to have a comparable manner of discussing the progress of the Ocean Decade. So just to briefly, if we could go to the next slide, please. We started preparing Brazil in 2019 for the Ocean Decade with a regional South Atlantic workshop that was already presented and pointed out. And we decided to build on this momentum and continue with a national and local consultation process and to set up the fundamentals of governance and structure within Brazilian political and public system to follow up with the implementation of the Ocean Decade. So we now conclude the preparatory phase with a governance structure established. And here you can see in this slide how we are organized. So we have, I'm sorry, the acronyms are here in Portuguese, so I'm gonna translate and present it to you. We have a National Steering Committee, which is the center white form that you can see, that is formed by 16 representatives from a wide range of sectors from the society, different stakeholders such as the Brazilian Academy of Science, as well as representatives from the early career professionals. So we are all gathering at least once a month to discuss the progress of the preparation phase and what are the next steps to take. And that's been extremely helpful to give us a good guidance and a good equilibrium on how to do and work. And through the process in 2020 of local consultations, we had an idea that came up that was to build regional, and Brazil has 5 regions, the Amazonic region, Northeast, South, Central-East, and West. And within these 5 regions, we've built up mobilization groups. Each of these groups, these 5 groups, are very different from each other. They have their own rules, ways of operation, and representatives, but they do encompass a large group of stakeholders, different variety and different sectors from the society. And they are connected to the steering committee. So now we have a capillary manner of engaging, communicating, and asking for, meetings and articulating in the future. So we are very happy to have this fundamental governance established. Next, please. And to build that, we've decided the first thing was on the 8th of June, the Day of the Ocean. We launched our official website and the consultation process, and as well as all the documentation and files, you can find it here. And it was very helpful because we launched it just in the very first months of the pandemic. So it was a very important tool to keep the communication going and also to, instruct all the different stakeholders on the different files and all the information that they need to have. As you can see, our web page has been accessed over 40,000 page views. and our YouTube channels, where we post all the videos. All of our consultation process was recorded, is online, you can see. So we already have over 11,000 views on our YouTube channel, which is only dedicated to the Ocean Decade. Next, please. And to sum up, we had over 3,000 registrations to our Ocean Decade meetings to collect subsidies to formulate our national plan. And that showed to us there's a lot of interest from local representatives, local stakeholders on this international, that was kicked off as an international process, but it's gaining its own feet on the ground. And we had in our consultation process there were effective workshops with local participation, over 600 participants, and mainly women. So, and that happened in each of the 5 regions of Brazil. So women are really empowered here in Brazil. And other than the consultation process, we opened an online submission of technical contributions. So we had over 300 forms sent to us, and we are now just tailoring it all up into the national plan for the Ocean Decade. And we intend to launch after the IOC implementation plan. And we hope that this will set the ground to a decade of many initiatives in Brazil. Next, please. I would like now just to present 5 suggestions on and some thoughts now that we're moving to the implementation phase. I think the 7 results, the 10 challenges, and the implementation plan that were the main mechanisms used to coordinate the preparatory phase would be enough for us to follow in a coordinated manner in the implementation phase. So thinking of further improvement, I would just suggest that the IOC provides to countries and all the stakeholders that are involved in the decade instructions on a logic model for countries so they can develop their planning on a comparable manner. And on that, we will also need the development of a basket of result and process indicators that we can track progress and evaluate results achieved. And with that basket of indicators, countries could pick and choose whatever it suits better each case. And still, it's a manner that you can, provide flexibility with comparability. So I think that's a way to take forward. In terms of financial mobilization, I know that IOC is already considering to have all these calls and provide funding with many research and on the field projects, but we also need mobilization and seed money for the decade's management as such, communication strategies in the national and local levels to promote engagement activities for monitoring and reporting. For instance, it's very important if countries could have a baseline of their national ocean science report. Or I know that you may have all the database already collected to do the global ocean science report. So why not allow that we use this data and have the support to build on the national level analysis so we can have a baseline and a midterm analysis and an evaluation at the end. I think this would give the ground for a good indicator of result together with other indicators for progress. And my final suggestion is that we could develop a common tabular format for biennial reporting, not only on progress of activities, but as well as financial investments that could be made by countries, but also mobilized from the private sector. And I think we established that from the very early moments of implementation. We're going to have great success in exchanging views between countries and partners, but also in understanding how we are all together moving forward. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Karen. And thank you both of you for highlighting the importance of documents like the Global Ocean Science Report. As you know, we had the first issue that came up a few years ago. And just recently, in the commemoration of the 60 years of the IOC, it was the launching of the second edition of the Global Ocean Science Report. This gives a very nice overview of the current situation, of the inequalities that we have between countries, which are issues that we want to tackle within the scope of the decade. Just before I ask a final question to Taylor, what I would like to ask everyone is, please, if you have questions for this panel, which I will open in about a few minutes, please write short, concise questions, and if possible, also state whom they are addressed to. If not, I will put them to the panel and they will answer. So what I would like to ask now, Taylor, is how do you think that the early career ocean professionals and also the youth can take this legacy of the decade onwards, not only during the decade, but after the decade?
Yeah, thank you, Louise. And I think before I even get into the presentation, I think your designation of early career ocean professionals versus youth is the most important thing to think about, and knowing that those are two separate stakeholder groups and two separate communities that need to be engaged in different ways. So next slide, please. So the overarching answer that I think I have here is that intergenerational diversity is necessary for a sustainable future. And that's looking towards the very next generation in the early career ocean professionals, which is a self-defined as being early in their career, so less than 10 years into their professional experience in any field related to the ocean. And we specifically use the word professional in order to be inclusive of all professions for many different sectors of society. So it's not just scientists, it's not just policymakers, it's not just lawyers or fishers. There's a diversity and range of sectors. And so this word cloud here comes from a survey that we gave to our existing ECOP community of how they see themselves and what they think that they can contribute towards the decade, and why the ECOP perspective is a unique perspective. And so you see future-looking, forward-looking, interdisciplinary, knowledgeable, collaborative. ECOPs represent the immediate future and legacy of the ocean decade. We're at the forefront of marine science, tech, policy, journalism, every other sector. And we need this two-way exchange of ideas between the individuals who got this decade started and who are bringing us along now, in order to make sure that the decade stays relevant and adapts and evolves with diverse input over the course of 10 years. And so that this next generation that will immediately take up leadership is prepared and has been involved since the beginning, to make sure that we'll be around to see this decade to its conclusion, and then thinking about next steps. And then next slide. Youth, on the other hand, represents the future beyond the decade. So we're defining these as university age and under. They will inherit the ocean that we are creating today. So all the things that we're discussing, collaborative co-design, regional efforts, national efforts, they're going to have the results of these decisions that we're making every day going forward here. So youth are the legacy of this transformation. And where I really think that they can be involved is their aspirational viewpoints. They help provide really necessary perspective and a more interdisciplinary way of thinking that can help us see beyond, specific data goals or specific projects, that they really have a great holistic perspective of what the word transformation can and should be. And youth are really not sitting out this ocean decade. So in addition to this ECOP group that I'm a part of, I've been working with a group here in the US, but that also works internationally, Heirs to Our Ocean, that has started a youth advisory council on the ocean decade in order to give advice to our national committee and other entities that are forming in the US on the ocean decade. And they recently held a youth summit that was open to youth from around the world, and that there were, we had over 200 youth attend from over 57 countries, and most of them were excited about the idea of forming these youth advisory councils in their own countries as well. So our hope is that, that this international ECOP effort has been working really well thus far, and we have a lot of national and regional representation, but that we can mirror the same thing with these youth groups so that the work that we're doing in the US to create this YAC can be a blueprint for other national committees and other national or regional efforts, so that it's natural that if you want to talk about the decade, that you need to include early career ocean professionals and youth. It's not even a question that they are included at the table. Next slide. I just wanted to end here with some key steps on how to include intergenerational diversity in the ocean decade. First is just integrating. Make sure, like I said, that youth and ECOPs are at the table in your organizations, institutions, and networks. Advocate for them to be there. If they're not there, speak up. Capacity development is a huge thing that unfunded mandates for involvement it's difficult to create transformational change with that. So funding ECOP and youth involvement, workforce development, to make sure that they can stay in this field and continue to make contributions going forward. Share your ideas with us and initiatives, and the ECOP group is submitting as a program underneath the decade, and so we're going to be looking for partners and ways to spread our message and get involved in global and regional and national efforts. And that will naturally, I think, lead to connection. We want to find ways that we can accomplish this transformational ocean goal together. And the ECOPs and youth are prepared to be a partner in that. So don't leave us out, and make sure that that our solutions and our ideas are at the forefront. Next slide. So the ECOPs are starting to get on social media, and we're having a website launching soon as well. And then my contact information if you have more specific questions about the youth and ECOP efforts. But thank you so much for having me today and including this perspective from the very start, before the decade even starts.
Thank you so much, Taylor. So I don't see any questions in the Q&A box. So is there anyone who would like to make any questions, or anyone from the panel would like to comment on what we have done?
Luis?
Yes, Cesar, please.
Yeah. Thank you. I think that it's clear from the comments we made is that the need for networking and the need for cooperating with the different stakeholders and taking into account, for instance, what we just saw by Taylor on the intergenerational process, and taking into account that this is an entire process that will transform completely the way how we are doing business. So in order to achieve that, we need to have and recognize the importance of each of the different stakeholders. And in particular, how science can be a transformative component into the lives of the humankind, of the humans. We can't just take this out from the context that what the UN decade will achieve is a transformation of the entire society. How the new civilization of the humankind will be transformed via and using science as one of the components for the spiritual transformation, as well as the relationship with the entire planet. So this is not only about oceanography. And that's why I really appreciate what you, Taylor, said on the importance of having the youth and the early careers professionals. It's extremely important that to take into account that, because what we are willing to achieve is reaching a new stage in our civilization. So, and the transformative component is ocean science.
Okay, thank you so much, Cesar. We have here one question, which is, are early career ocean professionals planning to submit a decade action program proposal? I don't know if anyone else can answer to this. Can you?
Yeah, it's in the final drafting phases, and we'll be submitting as a program enabled to collaborate in those ways. Yep.
Also, there is another question on how youth can be involved with the Youth Ambassadors program.
Yes, so the Heirs to Our Ocean, which is the US, but it's also International Youth Ocean Advocacy Group, is coordinating the US YAC, but they are actively looking and working with IOC to think about expanding those to other countries. So please, I can drop my contact information back in the chat. I can help get you in contact with the right people to start thinking about that. But I would encourage, youth in countries that are interested in this to start thinking about what your goals are. It's enough to mobilize, but you also have to come to the table and say, this is what we care about, and this is how we want to contribute. So yes, I'll definitely help get anyone connected who needs that.
Yes, we have here one question which I have some doubts, because they are talking about how ECOP, so our early career ocean professionals, are capturing underdeveloped communities' needs and so on, or if they are geared towards a more developed world. But ECOP is not an organization. So we are mentioning early career ocean professionals from each country. And the idea is that they embrace the main idea of the decades, the main objectives, and they contribute in their own country towards developing national science, and also they can transmit the needs to the capacity development network that we have at the IOC, and so that these questions can be addressed. So one of the things that we want to address in the decade is the question of inequalities of getting access to the data, of getting access to the data in different parts of the world, in the facility that you have in processing the data, in converting the data into information. And so this is one of the main aims in capacity development within the decade framework. I don't know if anyone wants to comment a bit on this. Would you like to say something, Taylor or Cesar?
Yeah, so just part of that, the survey that I showed the word cloud for, the ECOPS launched a survey last year, and that it had over 1,400 responses from almost every country in the world. And so we definitely have engagement from around the world. We have a core group of about 120 thus far that have been working very diligently on these efforts, but we know that we're going to need more country-specific and regional-specific efforts and outreach. So if you're interested in getting involved and helping us with that, because we can't do everything on our own, and we need those specific voices and sectors and focuses. So please, we're definitely looking to do that. So reach out if you'd like to help us with that.
Okay.
I would like just to add that the different fora, the regional workshop that we have been, and was already mentioned, most of them, they have already working groups that are working. In our case, the Western Tropical Atlantic, we have established the regional planning group and the different working groups to address the societal outcomes. So we are encourage all of the ECOPs to join those working groups in order to provide contribution to the different topics and challenges that we have in this particular region.
Thank you so much. Any other comment from our panelists? Okay, so I think it's we are coming to the end of this discussion, and next we will have Alison, and Alison Clausen is going to tell us about the next steps in the decade. So Alison has joined IOC as a program specialist in 2019, and she has over 20 years of professional experience in program and project development and management in the areas of marine conservation, policy, and climate change adaptation. So before joining IOC, she was based in Madagascar, where she worked through the Western Indian Ocean region for the World Bank, and most recently as the regional director for the Madagascar and Western Indian Ocean program of the Wildlife Conservation Society. Prior to that, she lived in Vietnam, where she worked through Southeast Asia co-chair for a range of development banks, UN agencies, and NGO partners. She's currently working on diverse ocean and marine policy issues, including support to the coordination of the preparation of the Ocean Decade. So she has an incredible experience, and she's a major asset that we have to help us develop the decade plan. So, Alison, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Luis, for the lovely introduction. Perhaps if we can move directly to jump straight into the heart of the subject. So if we can move to the first slide that has the, there we go, this one here. So first of all, good afternoon, good morning to everyone. I forgot to say that when I first jumped into the discussion before, but it's really a thrill to be here today. And so thank you very much to the Air Centre for making this possible for us. This is the last decade event for 2020. And after all the events we've had over this year and the previous 2 years, it's a really, really important milestone for us. It's marking the end of a long road that started in 2017 with the proclamation of the decade and has only increased in intensity since then. And this has obviously involved thousands of you in many different forums and meetings. So I really just want to, on behalf of the decade team as well, just really want to reiterate Vladimir's comments to thank you all very much for your engagement so far and encourage you to keep engaged as we move into this next phase, which is starting now in about 13 days time. So to do that, I want to give you an overview of some of the major milestones for 2021. It's going to be a very big and busy year, not only because it's the first year of the decade, but obviously with the COVID pandemic situation, there are still lots of uncertainties about the way events are going to be held, and lots of the events that were going to be held in 2020 are now in 2021. So we expect a very, very busy and exciting year. But for the Ocean Decade, we're starting to get a sense of some of what the big milestone moments throughout the year will be. So I wanted to run you through some of these, let you know also that all the details will be progressively put on our social media channels and on our website. So make sure you subscribe and are checking the website regularly. So first of all, obviously the Ocean Decade starts on the 1st of January, and hopefully you'll be flooded with social media and our digital launch campaign, which will be focusing on some of the characteristics of the ocean we want for 2030, and really trying to engage people and create excitement and enthusiasm and explain to a much broader audience why we need to act now to really change the course of the ocean's future. That social media campaign will continue over the next few months. But the first major event of 2021 will be a high-level event which is planned for the 28th of January. We've given it the name Brave New World, Brave New Ocean, and it's really a moment to take stock of the role of the ocean in our world, in our community, in our future economy. And we'll be having a number of high-level speakers, heads of state, heads of philanthropic foundations, as well as heads of our UN partner agencies, to really talk about their commitment to the Ocean Decade, including the launch of the Ocean Decade Alliance, which is one of the major resource mobilization mechanisms for the decade. And we've been talking a lot about funding, so that's obviously very relevant. So stay tuned for a save the date for that event, and please tune in to hear some of our world leaders talking about the importance of the ocean and the Ocean Decade. We'll be having a more formal Ocean Decade virtual launch towards the end of April, and we're just finalizing details of that with our partners now, but that will be a moment to talk about some of the key cross-cutting issues of the decade, such as data, innovation, capacity development, inclusivity, early career ocean professionals, gender, etc. We think it'll be a very rich event, and we'll be having diverse speakers from across different stakeholder groups. We then in early June, move into the first of a series of events which are going to be really the replacement for what was going to be the kickoff conference for the decade, which was going to be held in person in Berlin. If many of you, I think, will remember that the German government has very kindly offered to host the first international conference for the Ocean Decade. This is unfortunately not going to be able to be held as an in-person event in May in 2021 as was anticipated. So there will be a high-level opening segment for that conference, which will be a virtual event on the 1st of June, and we're just finalizing the structure for that. And this will be followed then from July through to February or May in 2022 with a series of 7 Ocean Decade Laboratories, which will be a series of thematic online sessions to really try and keep momentum going, to synergize partnerships, to catalyze collaborations, to talk about co-design, to talk about co-delivery, to see some of the programs and the projects that are already being endorsed. And this will be followed by an in-person conference that will still happen in Berlin, but in 2022, once hopefully our travel restrictions and so on are lifted. So again, please keep an eye on the website and the social media for more information on the dates and how you can get involved in those laboratories, as well as the in-person conference. We'll be having a series of regional kickoff conferences as well, and we have very generous offers from the Egyptian government and the Thai government to host an African and an Asian kickoff conference. The dates are still being confirmed on those, and we hope that other regions around the world will also find the resources and the hosts to be able to have regional celebrations to kick off the decade in 2021. And then, of course, we still have the 2021 UN Ocean Conference, which will be held in Lisbon. So very appropriate to our discussion today with Minister Heitor and Luis who are here. We're all waiting attentively for the final confirmation of the dates for that, but that will obviously be a really big moment again for the decade, given the focus of the UN Ocean Conference on science and innovation and the role that plays in sustainable development. So that's a little bit of a taster to whet your appetites for 2021. Lots of events coming up, lots of ways to get engaged, to participate, to attend, to hold side events, to hold sessions, and the best thing to do is keep your eye on the website for more details. I want to now talk about two other very tangible ways you can get involved in the decade as of today. Now, this first one is something that is just being launched this afternoon, and it's really something that people have been asking us about for quite some time now, so we're really happy to be launching it. But I want to come back to this idea of the implementation plan for the Ocean Decade really being a framework. So throughout the decade, partners around the world, including yourselves, are going to be carrying out a very diverse range of decade actions. So these are going to range from the big global programs that we were talking about and that we're currently collecting through the call for actions, to smaller local activities or initiatives. And these may be things like events or workshops or publications or training events or conferences that are being held throughout 2021 and beyond, and that are contributing to the collective movement of the Ocean Decade because they're relevant to the Ocean Decade challenges or because they align to the objectives of the decade. Now, we have finally got online the process whereby if you have one of these events or workshops or publications or conferences, you can now request endorsement of your decade activity. And my colleague Chloe is going to put the link, you can see it on the slide, but she'll also put the link into the chat box. So we'll be asking you to provide some basic information about your activity, how it contributes to the challenges and the criteria, when it's going to start, when it's going to finish, who the public is, what form it's going to take, and then we'll be starting to make decisions on endorsement of those decade activities in early 2021. And this will allow you to use the logo and to really be officially recognized as part of the Ocean Decade movement. So if you do have something coming up, please register it as early as possible. We expect there'll be a very large number of demands, so it might take a few weeks to get an answer, but now is the time to start getting those decade activities into the system so that we can start getting them endorsed. And then the next one, sorry, if we can move to the, sorry, haven't been watching carefully the slides. If we can move to the next slide, please. This last slide is really just a reminder about the call for decade actions, and I'll go through this quickly because we have spoken about it already. This is the first in a series of call for decade actions. It's really open to global or major regional programs. As I said, it's not always black and white where the line between a program and a project is can be drawn. So I gave you some advice in the chat box how you can get some advice on that. It's also specifically looking at actions that contribute to post-COVID-19 recovery. We all know ocean science has been really hard hit by the pandemic. So we're looking for ideas in terms of programs that can really sustain and build ocean science infrastructure or capacity in light of the pandemic. It is open till the 15th of January. Decisions will be made in the first quarter of 2021. And we, up until that point and even past the 15th of January, as Vladimir said, there will be dialogue with the IOC, there will be dialogue with partners. It doesn't end on the 15th of January. It's really a brainstorming to be able to put these different pieces together so we have a first set of programs for the decade. There are no geographic or thematic restrictions on who can apply, and the call will be followed by other calls for programs and projects in 2021 and beyond. As I said before, it's not a funding call. But certainly there are ways in which we can help make connections between potential actions and those funders who want to engage in the decade. So there are two very clear and tangible ways you can already get involved if you've got an activity in mind, if you've got a program in mind, and then keep an eye on the website for the other events and milestones that will be happening throughout 2021. Before I end, just wishing you all a wonderful end of the year as well, and we'll all be celebrating virtually together on the 1st of January with the start of the Ocean Decade. Thank you very much, and with that, I'll hand back to Luis.
Thank you so much, Alison. We have the chance for a few questions. If you have any questions for Alison concerning the next steps of the decade, particularly for 2021 and the next actions, is there anyone who wants to intervene? Or any of the previous panelists who also wants to do something? I don't see any questions in the Q&A box, but we have time for 2 or 3 questions. Also, any comments that you want to give? So if we don't have any comments, thank you so much for this overview that you gave us. And before I present Mário Laginha, who is one of the most famous pianists in Portugal, I will like to tell you that it's my pleasure and my honor to have been here and sharing this session. What I would like to say is that we deeply thank the Minister of Science and Science, Technology and Higher Education for Portugal for being here with us. We thank Vladimir, all the panelists that we have here, and we also thank all the participants that were with us today. And one of the things that we should not forget is that all these sessions are being able to happen because there are people behind the scenes that are doing all the difficult work behind this. One of them is José Moutinho from the Air Center, and also the team from the Air Center, who have been people who are working so diligently and for such a long time to make these things happen, which is a platform for discussion, for sharing ideas between all of us. And so many thank you to all of you. So now I would like just to give you just a very short introduction to Mário Laginha. Mário Laginha is a pianist and a composer. He's one of the most famous Portuguese jazz musicians. He is highly recognized for the collaborations he has done with other singers also as well, like Maria João, for instance. He has recorded lots of albums, about a dozen albums, and he has toured everywhere extensively. So he also has worked with Bernardo Sassetti and Pedro Burmester, which are also two very important pianists in Portugal. And as far as I know, he has also recently composed something which is called Atlantic, which is absolutely critical for such a meeting like this, that we have. I think this is the first audition that will be done on this music. Is that correct, Mário?
Actually, the music that I will be playing is not the Atlantic. It will be played one day. We have Zemuting has an idea about this, but now this is music from me, but it's older. It's not the album that was just now released, and it's called Atlantic. Yeah.
Okay, thank you so much. So I leave you all with listening to Mário Laginha, which is the best way we can have to close this session. Thanks to everyone, and we are always available for you if you can be of any help. So the floor is yours, Mário, and thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you. Ok. Etc, etc. Por incrível que pareça, este tema que estou a tocar é de um disco meu de um trio que é comigo, o Julinar Goelz e o Helga Norbakken, que acabou de sair e que se chama Atlântico. Às vezes as coincidências são, parece que estavam escritas que tinham que acontecer. Esta é uma delas. Em relação ao que eu toquei, foi improvisado, coisa que eu gosto de fazer, que é sento-me ao piano e improviso. Os temas que toquei a seguir são composições. O segundo é um tema meu que se chama Tanto Espaço, está num disco que foi uma encomenda, é dedicada à arquitetura. Relacionei a música com a arquitetura. O tema a seguir chama-se Um Choro Feliz e foi gravado na sua versão original no Rio de Janeiro, porque foi está num disco que eu e Maria João fizemos, dedicado para comemorar os 500 anos da chegada de Pedro Álvares Cabral ao Brasil. O tema a seguir foi fado. Enfim, não é um fado convencional, como poderão perceber, mas eu acho que a melodia tem bastante de português. E finalmente o último tema que toquei chama-se Despedida e acho que foi a despedida e acho que me falta dizer que nada mais urgente agora do que defender e proteger o planeta e acho que tudo o que eu possa fazer para chamar a atenção, nem que seja um bocadinho só, para uma coisa tão importante que é o lugar onde vivemos, vale a pena. Portanto, espero que corra tudo bem e que sejam muito bem sucedidos, porque é importante para todos nós.